Good afternoon, and welcome to the MaddyTalks. Before we get started, I'd like to ask everyone to please take out your cell phones and put them on silent mode or airplane mode or turn them off completely. The one exception would be if you would like to join the conversation on social media, you can at Albright Inst or hashtag MaddyTalks. Thank you.
I'm Joanne Murray, and I'm joined by our faculty director, Joe Joyce, in welcoming with enormous heartfelt gratitude, Madam Secretary. Please stand as we welcome you here this afternoon. It is my great honor to welcome back to campus today President Emerita Diana Chapman Walsh. For those of you just meeting her today, including most of the Albright Fellows here, you can come to know many things about her accomplishments in her bio. You can know that Diana is a member of the class of 1966, and you can hear how she approached her presidency. But I must tell you that even this summary of her august career only hints at the contributions this woman has made to this remarkable institution. In her years leading Wellesley, Diana's leadership was characterized by asking core questions about the place and purpose of liberal education in shaping a more just world. Questions of what we should teach, how we should learn, what qualities of character students needed to possess in order to carry the mantle of leadership into the world. Diana was a listener, a power listener. I will speak only of my direct experience working for her. From listening to students state that some of their more powerful experiences were on summer internships, Diana, as part of her capital campaign, enlarged the pool for funded internships from 30 to over 300. Making opportunities for those who would otherwise be flipping burgers at Schneider in order to meet financial need, instead spending summers in Egypt, Dubai, and Shanghai. When she heard that students were largely left on their own to make meaning of the powerful learning they had in the world, she deliberately set aside and made a priority to bring students' learning closer to their learning in the classroom. Hence, the Tanner Conference was founded. And finally, what is all this learning without integrity? Since 1919, Wellesley has had an honor code that's undergirded student learning. Sensing that its power was diminished by its outdated language and student distance from it as an asset guiding their daily lives, Diana set about a year-long community-wide consideration of what it means to be a community of honor, a community of women who will commit to a lifetime of honor. A role model for all of us, students, faculty, administrative staff, all staff. Integrity was always at the foundation of every decision made under her leadership. These developments prepared the way for Diana to create the Albright Institute in her final year of her presidency. It is only fitting that she returns to campus today to celebrate and witness the Institute's place and purpose at Wellesley and in the world. I give you Diana Chapman Walsh. Wow,
Wow, wow, wow. It is so great to be back. It is so great to be back. Thank you, Joanne, for those beautiful words. And of course, it's one thing to get things started and quite another thing to turn them into amazing programs. It's just such a joy and such a pleasure to be back here. All the people I have so sorely missed. I look through the audience and see people that I haven't seen in a long time and want to run over and give them all a hug. I will later on. And to be back with you, Secretary Albright, Madeline, Maddy today. Maddy today. I don't think I ever called you Maddy, but I'm happy to do it now. Maddy this afternoon. How wonderful, how very wonderful to be reunited with you. Really, just such a pleasure and an honor to be part of this celebration of the fantastic Albright Institute. Can you hear me way in the back? Good, all right, well, keep yelling. We have over 275 fellows already. I understand 210, I think, of them are back, which is good. There we go. Thank you. Amazing. It's truly, truly, truly an amazing story. So we're here this afternoon to inaugurate the MaddyTalks, MaddyTalks, because people are going to talk to Maddy, and she's going to talk too. And I'm honored to be kicking them off. Joanne told me that some of her colleagues last week were a little worried. They thought maybe I should go last. They were afraid that maybe I would intimidate the subsequent speakers. I laughed because I had their bios, and I know and knew who was going to be intimidating, and it wasn't me. We're about to hear 7 stories that will inspire us, challenge us, move us, change us. I know because we had a little rehearsal yesterday. You're in for a treat. My story probably won't do all that to you, but it begins and ends in gratitude. First and foremost, to Madeleine Albright. I want to start with just one of the reasons that I'm personally thankful to her, to you, and then focus on some of what we all owe her, the larger we, Wellesley College, and the world that Wellesley serves through this institute established to carry forward her legacy, to live that legacy on into an uncertain future. This is my one story. I had about 6, but I had to winnow it down to 1. Shortly after word went out that I would be stepping down from the presidency, Madeleine invited me to Washington to talk about my future. Over lunch, she drew me out about what I might do next. I wasn't sure, but had been sure that it was time, after 14 years, to move on, as hard as that was, and it was hard. I was receiving a lot of advice in those days and feeling the pressure of expectations, as if only something quite stupendous could possibly justify leaving Wellesley. There was none of that from Madeleine. She was present to me with the generative listening that makes her such a consummate diplomat. A friend is someone, it has been said, who hears the song in your heart and can sing it back to you when you have forgotten the words. She was being a friend. She suggested that I resist the impulse to focus on just one of my several areas of interest and instead see whether I might weave the disparate threads of my life into another new whole, to hold the complexity lightly and wait and see what might open up. That was the best advice I received at that pivotal time. You probably don't even remember. As I am very sure that advice from Madam Secretary usually is. Countless world leaders have learned for themselves that it pays to hear her out and to take her to heart, as I did. Following that encounter, this post-presidency decade has been richly fulfilling, a joyful time of learning, integration, and growth, as I had hoped it might be, with writing and speaking and full engagement on the governing boards of nonprofits whose work I admire. They're listed in the program. Each is sui generis, each a story unto itself, but through it all, I've been studying and applying what I've learned about how to contribute to good governance, healthy organizational dynamics, trustworthy leadership, and the creation of generative social environments that support human flourishing and a steadfastness of mind and heart. I've explored fascinating worlds on the frontiers of higher education, healthcare and health policy, genomic medicine, and at the intersection where Western brain science meets Eastern mind science. Among my guides have been inspiring medical leaders, world-class scientists, policy gurus, captains of industry, social theorists, and even the Dalai Lama, with whom I've spent dozens of hours in India and across the US. Last June, my husband and I judged an experiment we had been privately running an unqualified success. After trying out 2 winners in California to be close to our only child and hers, our only and beloved grandchild, Sean, we have changed our permanent residence. It was clear that to be part of their lives, we would have to uproot our own, and so we did. So I've been winnowing my East Coast commitments, but with MIT still bringing me back, I'm on the executive committee, bringing me back almost monthly to Boston, our home here, and the friends I daily miss. The MIT work involves me at the innovative edge of higher education at a decisive moment in this industry. It keeps me in touch with academic and student life and offers me hope that we humans may still step up in time to the challenges of a changing climate we have ignored for far too long. That brings me back to the life and legacy of Madeleine Albright and the larger we of Wellesley College, the profound gratitude the college owes her, owes you, for allowing us to create this institute in her name and for the dedication she has shown it during its formative years. For in doing so, it seems to me, she is enabling Wellesley to extend our legacy back into our founding ethos and forward towards answers we humans will long be seeking as we come to terms with the grave threat we now know our behavior is posing to the Earth's fragile ecosystems on which all life depends. The climate crisis is a singular challenge in global governance and global leadership, a philosophical, technical, moral, systemic challenge of immense proportions. It will complicate every one of the problems you Albright Fellows are studying here and working with such brilliant intensity to help solve. It is the quintessential problem of collective action and decision-making under uncertainty, a high-stakes adaptive test for humanity that will not yield to technology alone, that will call on every discipline, every sector, and every level, all our capacities, every one of us, as we face our situation. Commentary on this situation ranges from the apocalyptic to the techno-optimistic, with a middle ground in which scholars are asking what it means to be entering what some are calling the Anthropocene, a new epoch in the Earth's geologic history in which humans are now the driving force. We stand, it has been said, between the impossible, mobilizing adequate action, and the unthinkable, a planetary meltdown. We stand in a tragic gap, we might say. How do we keep our balance in such a place? First, we find ways to stare down the twin faces of fear, the urge to look away and become lost in a cloud of illusion, on one hand, and on the other, to run headlong into the storm and be torn apart. And we cannot strike that balance alone. It's not possible. We can take strength in the knowledge that good people everywhere are facing into that gap, more and more every day. They're working to replace dysfunctional economic, political, and social systems that reward excesses of profit, of growth, and financial clout, with alternatives designed to promote justice, peace, and cooperation. We can join them. No one who has studied this problem with any degree of objectivity is denying that climate change is already here and portends a global future of widespread upheaval. But can we arouse ourselves to act wisely in time? Why wouldn't we? What holds us back? Well, we face formidable obstacles in the political and economic structure of the problem and in the reality that climate disruption is inflicting the greatest suffering on those least responsible for causing it, least equipped to adapt to it, least able to resist the powerful forces intent on protecting their private interests at public expense. This is moral and ethical terrain high on the agenda of the Albright Institute, high on the Secretary's agenda throughout her distinguished career. Useful responses will depend on imagination and courage, sophisticated partnerships, wise policy, effective treaties, focused investment, research and development, moral discernment, and mass mobilization, areas to which the faculty and fellows of the Albright Institute bring abundant expertise. Beneath that, though, is an existential aspect of the climate problem some of us see as a crisis of caring. The worry that we humans may be narrowing our consciousness to sleepwalk into the future, lulled by a materialistic and technological sideshow that diverts our attention from what is happening. And so we ask, do we really understand what it means to be human? To be a product of the stunning beauty of this living world we see slipping away? A world we have forgotten how to love enough? Will we muster the cultural maturity to see that we are of, not above, the vast cycles of creation and destruction out of which the universe emerged billions of years ago? Can we embrace our interdependence with all living beings to see and truly to feel our impact on distant other people and on the natural world? Can we see that literally everything we do does matter? Will we act with compassion in solidarity with the billions of our fellow humans barely clinging to life, the theme of this symposium, who already are the first victims of climate chaos, with far worse on its way? And what if it's true now, as some are arguing, that we will not safely make this passage without radically reordering much of what we take for granted? Our institutions and politics, our economy and its underlying ideology, the very fundamentals of our life. How then shall we live? Monumental questions. Where to begin? Why not here in the Albright Institute, with its roots in the way women have been learning on this campus for a century and a half? What is it we do here when it's boiled down to its essence? We learn and we love. We open our minds and we open our hearts. We share our stories, face our fears, nourish our hopes. We question ourselves. We question each other. And in that questioning, we discover how little any one of us alone can know. As much as we may study, as hard as we may try. We notice how easily we can fool ourselves, how complacent we can become. And so, over time, we come to experience how much we depend on each other. When we can all find the courage to bring our most authentic selves, our biggest dreams, to this rich learning community in which Wellesley is evolving, then we begin to live into answers where we had only questions before. We glimpse the hidden structures that repeatedly produce results no one wants. We gather more voices, seek more perspectives, reach out in more skilled efforts to support one another in finding the balance that will sustain our compassion. We reassess our reality, weave more compelling narratives, and they begin to reveal a future many can want. We learn to bridge and balance tensions without collapsing them, to hold contradictions creatively until they open to wider possibilities, as Madeline encouraged me to do that day at lunch in DC. Take, for example, the tension between power and love. Power without love is reckless and abusive, Martin Luther King said in the last weeks of his life. And love without power is sentimental and anemic. The collision of immoral power with powerless morality constitutes the major crisis of our time. Martin Luther King. The experience of leading Wellesley taught me that my power, the power of the presidency, existed for the essential purpose of enabling others to find their purpose, their authority, their self-authorship. And I learned that to achieve this, I would have to remain open to others in a way that is the essence of love, love defined as the drive to sustain unity and maintain connections. I would have to respect the other person's reality, the other person's yearning, the other person's path of growth, to be open to influence back from others and their different experiences. And this, in turn, taught me the value of every kind of diversity as an indispensable resource for learning in a community. I learned to hold another tension, harder still, to honor my inner life in the face of all that was swirling around me. It took time and effort to develop the skills to manage external realities and yet maintain a quality of attention in the present that could embrace complexity and meet each new moment gladly with equanimity. I didn't always succeed at this, far from it. But I learned to find my way back when I was lost and to know that this quality of mindful presence was a capacity I wanted for myself and for my leadership team because I wanted it for our students. The disciplines today's students will need to grapple with global challenges are the ones we will all need, and they are a life's work, never fully mastered, always requiring cultivation. We'll need the strength to stare down our demons and engage the world with curiosity, our fear in check, and free of regret, recrimination, and the defeat of shame and blame. We'll need to hear the diversity within ourselves, our own inner voices, identities, moods, to notice how fluid and ephemeral they are so that we can appreciate differences in others and use the practice of self-discovery to move beyond ourselves. We'll need to move beyond dualities to multiplicities of seeing and of knowing so that we can recognize that inequalities that create lived realities that may never even intersect unless we stretch ourselves to bring them together. As we watch the unraveling of systems and structures around the world in these complicated times, we should pay attention and tell the truth. We should avoid as best we can causing harm to any other. We should not be the ones to cast shadows, but strive instead to be sources of light. And so we need to laugh more, to connect more, to linger more, to stop and feel our gratitude, to embody our gratitude, to express it, to read more poetry. Of course, loss is the great lesson of life, Mary Oliver writes. But also I say this, that light is an invitation to happiness, and that happiness, when it's done right, is a kind of holiness, palpable and redemptive. In Madeleine Albright, we have a leader who shines light and who does happiness right. Though she herself would not say it this way, I want to say that today, with the MaddyTalks, we celebrate the gift of her love. Thank you, Maddy.
Thank you, President Emerita Chapman-Walsh. That was really great. It was really a pleasure. The Madeleine Corbel Albright Institute for Global Affairs is a model for educating and inspiring the next generation of global leaders. Guided by a multidisciplinary curriculum, innovative pedagogy, encouraging exploration, risk-taking, and resiliency, and taking a multidisciplinary, inquiry-driven, and team-based approach to addressing global challenges. I can think of no better way to describe life after Wellesley and after the Albright Institute. The Albright Global Network, as of today, is nearly 300 fellows. That's incredible. Each of us has our own story, our own experiences, our own perspectives as we navigate our ways in the world, following our careers, following our interests, all of us united under our own sense of purpose and impact, and guided by the leadership and admiration for Secretary Madeleine Albright, Maddy. What a treat then to be able to hear from 7 of our own alumni in today's MaddyTalks. Stories that will bring us from our backyard here in Cambridge all the way to rural China, showcasing some of the important work and issues in which Albright Institute Fellows have engaged since participating in the Institute. We begin our talks with a news alert from Sarah Mahmood, who works at CNN's Anderson Cooper 360. Sarah will speak today about how we can be more conscious news consumers, especially as pertains to human rights crises. It was Sarah's time at both Albright and Wellesley that has inspired her to keep pushing forward, and one day she hopes to crack that glass ceiling in political journalism. Sarah.
And we begin tonight with breaking news. Thousands of boat people from Syria and Afghanistan set up migrant camp in popular Greek island, with holidaymakers branding the situation disgusting. Not my words. They're from the Daily Mail, the world's most popular news website, in an article despairing over how Syrian refugees were creating problems for British tourists. That narrative changed a few months later when one of the boat people became a tiny victim in a human catastrophe. The migrants that were once considered cockroaches became refugees whom the world needed to help. Seems like a positive change, right? I just want to ask, how many of you are familiar with the photo of the little boy on the beach? And how many of you know his name? It's Alan Kurdi. We saw how baby Alan's life ended, but we don't even know his name. Baby Alan's photo was splashed throughout newspapers across the world, but he wasn't even granted the right to be the subject of his own story. Alan's tragic life marked a turning point in how we view the Syrian refugee crisis. But the emotional groundswell was not matched by an understanding of the facts on the ground. The devil may be in the details, but the public's interest sure wasn't. And so the widespread calls to accept more refugees were halted 2 months later when fear overtook sympathy. As news reports spread that a Syrian passport had been found on one of the Paris attack terrorists, the refugees became dangerous criminals once again. Later, the passport was deemed to have been stolen or fake, but the damage had already been done. And after asylum seekers from the Middle East assaulted women in Germany on New Year's Eve, baby Alan became the poster boy for a very different kind of story. The magazine Charlie Hebdo ran a cartoon imagining little Alan growing up to be a criminal one day. Because that's what happens when people are reduced to props. They can be used for all kinds of purposes in all kinds of ways. Let's turn our attention now to another story. In 2012, the charity Invisible Children produced what became the most viral video in history at the time. Its popularity is all the more impressive, considering it focused on an often ignored country on an often ignored continent. Kony 2012 told the story of Ugandan rebel leader Joseph Kony and his heinous use of child soldiers. The video spread across the world as people put up posters and signed petitions demanding that the American government stop Kony. The film was criticized for largely oversimplifying the conflict and completely ignoring the role that Uganda should play on its own soil. But we were on a mission to get the bad guy, with Jason Russell, the film's director, as our leader. Once again, the children actually at the center of the conflict were no longer the subjects of their own stories. And because it was Russell who became the focus, as he fell out of favor with the public, so too did his cause. The year is now 2016, and Coney has become a distant memory. The plight of child soldiers no longer receives attention in the mainstream news. But don't be disheartened, because yes, it's true that journalists are always on the chase for the next big story, but some stories are so well told that they're here to stay. A few years back, the world learned of an incredible young woman named Malala Yousafzai, not a victim of the Taliban, but the youngest Nobel Peace Prize winner in history. And she doesn't seem to be going anywhere, because we're not merely fighting for her, we're fighting with her for a change that will last. It's in that same spirit that I want to share with you today the story of Dr. Rafai Hamo, a scientist and Syrian refugee who attended President Obama's State of the Union after he shared his story on Humans of New York. A story about a man who didn't need saving, but wanted to save the world himself. A story so powerful, it moved one of the most powerful men in the world. Because Dr. Hamo doesn't want to be known as a victim or a refugee. He wants to be known as a scientist with books teeming with blueprints for inventions. A person we should not just fight for, but fight with for a change that will last. And by the way, it was you who got Dr. Hamo's story out there by liking it and sharing it on Facebook. When you demanded that his story be covered, the media listened. Because you see, the news doesn't just happen to you. As my econ professor would say, it's all about supply and demand. You decide which articles to click on. You decide which videos go viral. You decide which topics are trending. You are an active consumer, and you can be a conscious one. You have the power to share, to tweet, to like. You have the power to demand what the media should supply. Think of how you can use it for good. Think of how you can use it with integrity. Think of how you can use it to change the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zara. I'm very excited to introduce our next speaker, Sooah Cho, who comes from the very first Albright class in 2010. Sooah joins us from just down the road in Cambridge, where she is currently pursuing a joint degree MBA and MPP at Harvard Business School and the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. Based on her previous experiences at the UN Global Compact, the World Bank Group, and FSG, Sooah invites us to consider how a market-based approach can creatively effective solutions to some of the great challenges that the world faces today. Sooah. Yep.
Six years ago, on a cold winter day like today, I stood before Secretary Albright and other Albright Fellows. Back then, I was presenting recommendations on how to tackle child mortality across the world. This is a photo of my team and me. We're wearing those silly birthday hats that were handed out to a portion of the audience to visually represent how few children survive to celebrate their 5th birthdays in developing countries. And as you can see, Secretary Albright was one of the lucky few to receive a birthday hat that day. Reducing child mortality was one of the Millennium Development Goals that the world leaders had set to meet by 2015. But here we are in 2016, and we have failed to meet more than half of these goals. And now we're facing a much broader set of ambitious targets called the Sustainable Development Goals. When I was at the World Bank Group this past summer, I learned that development finance needs to increase from billions to trillions in order to reach these new set of goals. But if we weren't able to even meet the initial MDGs, how are we ever going to meet these new ones? Clearly, something needs to be done differently here. So what can we do to address these kinds of large-scale challenges? My journey to answer this question initially began as an Albright Fellow, supporting President Clinton's Haiti earthquake reconstruction efforts. As a fellow, I reviewed many housing proposals to rebuild Port-au-Prince. And I was just astounded by the potential impact that construction companies could have on the future of the country. By training and hiring local Haitians, by adopting earthquake-resistant architectural designs, and by establishing energy-efficient electric systems. These companies had a powerful and unique potential to make Haiti's recovery a better place for Haiti. So, following this experience, I actually came across none other than Secretary Albright at the Clinton Global Initiative. She spoke about market-based solutions, which further sparked my curiosity to learn more about what businesses can do. And I stand here today on this stage because I believe that the greatest source of untapped potential for social innovation lies in the private sector. So traditionally, our world approached problems like hunger and malnutrition by distributing food aid in low-income countries. But imagine instead a world where food and beverage companies are leading to tackle malnutrition. Well, this is exactly what Nestle is doing in India, a country where vitamin A deficiency is one of the most common causes of childhood blindness. Nestle used its own R&D resources to better understand the nutritional needs in India and developed an affordable spice product that was fortified with the much-needed nutrients that the population was lacking. And through these affordable spice products, Nestle was not only able to reach millions of families who were previously suffering from malnutrition, but it also increased sales in India by 70%. And this, in turn, motivated Nestle to further innovate and invest in similar products. So this is what the co-founders of FSG and the greatest business strategists of our time call creating shared value. It's essentially about using a business model to generate social impact and business value simultaneously. At FSG, I used to advise companies on creating shared value across various industries. And this work was very exciting, particularly because of the scale of the solutions. For example, Vodafone and Safaricom developed M-Pesa, a mobile banking service, which now provides 17 million people in East Africa access to financial services. Creating shared value not only provides scalable solutions, but sustainable solutions that are inherently a part of the core business model. So nowadays, lots of companies are starting to give back to society through philanthropic donations and corporate social responsibility projects. And these efforts are commendable in many ways. But the problem is that they're simply not sustainable over time. And that's why solutions that are inherently embedded in the core business model are much, much more powerful in the long run. So as we enter 2016, and we continue to search solutions for the new Sustainable Development Goals, just think about what the world could look like if we could harness the power of creative business models to develop scalable and sustainable solutions to the development challenges of our time. I could just envision a new future where innovative entrepreneurs join efforts with teachers, with policymakers, and scientists to improve food security and establish energy-efficient transportation systems, and build cost-effective models for education and healthcare across the world. But the business community cannot do this alone. And that's why I challenge all of you in this room to join in making that future a reality. A world where every child gets one of these and much more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sooah. Rebecca Turkington's passion lies in a place where surprisingly women are least represented: peace negotiations. Fueled by this interest, Rebecca spent last year interviewing women all around the world who broke the barriers to participate in formal peace talks in their own countries. It was Secretary Albright who helped launch the resulting report at Georgetown and noted that when women band together, their collaboration can make a real difference. As we'll hear, one of the most powerful tools available for durable peace is women's networks. Rebecca.
We all know that women are underrepresented in the highest echelons of power, but these numbers are even more staggering in the field of peace and security. Women comprise barely 10% of peace negotiators, and only 4% of signatories to all peace agreements have been women. Though these numbers are astonishingly low, they represent incredible stories of women fighting to access the places where decisions are made and insisting that they be at the table when the future of their countries is decided. This past year, I was part of a research team that set out to tell some of those stories. We interviewed almost 100 women who were involved in peace processes in Kenya, the Philippines, Guatemala, and Northern Ireland, asking them what they had done to break through the barriers that keep so many other women out. And what we found was the defining factor in giving women a pathway to peace talks was strong networks of other women. In all 4 countries we visited, women had been working together for years in grassroots movements. When they saw the opportunity to participate in high-level negotiations, they took it, and those prior relationships gave them the speed, the legitimacy, and the support to make a significant impact. In Guatemala, the primary avenue for input into the 1994 peace negotiation was through a formal coalition called the ASC. When it was founded, women were told that if they could mobilize in 1 week and come up with a comprehensive platform, that the women's sector could remain part of that coalition. Realizing that it might be their only chance, 32 women's organizations came together, organized themselves into teams, and hammered out a comprehensive agenda that was acceptable to their diverse constituencies. Their success inspired the women of Northern Ireland 2 years later. Women had always been on the front lines of the peace movement in Northern Ireland, but had been almost completely excluded from high-level political brokering. They were sick of politics as usual, and they were fed up with seeing each other at funerals. So in 1996, when elections were announced to decide who would take part in upcoming negotiations, a group of women activists jumped at the opportunity. A small change in the electoral law meant that if they could find enough women to run for office across the country, they might be able to win a place at the table. So, with 6 weeks until the election, no money, no candidates, and no offices, they created their own political party, the Northern Ireland Women's Coalition. From their first meeting around a kitchen table, they reached out to the networks that they had built through the women's movement, the civil rights movement, the peace movement, and years of cross-community activism. They incorporated women from both sides of the political divide and built their platform by consensus, addressing the bread and butter issues that affected all people, like education, poverty, and inequality. We interviewed one woman who told us that she called hundreds of people asking them to run for office and put their names on the ballot for the NIWC. When one woman needed some extra convincing, she said, well, if you run, I'll run too. Another told us about strategy meetings over spaghetti dinners while the women's children played together in the living room. When they came back to general meetings in Belfast, others were horrified that their policy papers were covered in pasta sauce. In Kenya, after post-election violence in 2008, women took the opportunity to lay out what they saw as the most pressing issues facing their country. Despite deep political feuds, they reached out to their civil society colleagues and gathered at the hotel where negotiations were taking place. They first organized what they called a spitting session, so women could air their grievances, but then came back together, identified shared priorities, and ensured that both mediation teams took into account cross-cutting issues of democracy and human rights. In the Philippines, the peace process unfolded over a number of years, but whenever a place opened up on one of the mediation teams, women would put each other's names forward and lobby for members of their own networks to be appointed to official roles. In 2013, one of these women became the first ever female chief negotiator in the world, Miriam Coronel Ferrer. When women do make it to the table, their voices make a difference. In Northern Ireland, the Women's Coalition used their platform to insist that the final agreement include issues like victims' rights, reconciliation, integrated education, and women's political participation. In Kenya, they pushed for more robust transitional justice mechanisms and a gender quota. In Guatemala, women advocated for the rights of indigenous people and for better protections against domestic violence, all issues that would never have made it to the table without their support. While power-sharing deals and disarmament treaties may end immediate violence, these issues that deal with social transformation are the ones that determine long-term success. 1/2 of all peace agreements fail within 5 years. And new research indicates that one of the key factors correlated with longer duration is the participation of women from civil society. Despite UN resolutions that require women's participation in peace processes, you only have to look around the world at what's happening today in Yemen, in Syria, in Myanmar, in South Sudan, to see that women still struggle for a seat at the table. If we want to build stronger, more durable peace across the globe, we must recognize the power of women's networks. Our research showed in case after case that women succeeded in impacting peace processes when they reached out to those civil society networks. Their voices made a difference, and they should serve as models for women who are trying to solve conflicts today. We are all part of strong networks of women, the Wellesley Network, the Albright Institute Network that we're here to celebrate today. And when the opportunity comes to make a difference, these relationships will be our most powerful assets. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. In our next Maddy Talk, Alexandra Day asks us the question, what do the Albright Institute, the world's largest physics laboratory, and the White House have in common? Alexandra's Albright Fellowship inspired her to explore the seemingly unusual connection between physics and global affairs. Along the way, she discovered a passion for solving real-world problems that has taken her around the world and across academic fields. She may even inspire you to think differently about the role you play in solving problems. Alexandra.
When people find out that I did particle physics research in college, they like to ask me about the Higgs boson. They'll say something like, have you ever been to the lab in Switzerland where it was discovered? Or, aren't all of the scientists there trying to create a black hole that's going to swallow the whole Earth? And no, they're not trying to make a black hole that's going to swallow the whole Earth. But yes, I've actually been there. I worked there one summer in college. I wasn't doing physics, though. I was doing international relations. And this is usually where people get confused. But aren't you a physics major? Why were you doing international relations? And the reason, of course, is because I'm an Albright Fellow. It's because I'm part of an institute that has always encouraged me to pursue my passions in multiple areas. When I first came to Wellesley, everyone asked me what I wanted to major in. I was 18 and fresh out of high school, so I thought that physics sounded like a good idea, but I also was interested in music and art and poetry and history, and I didn't want to give any of those things up. I wanted to study the mathematics of music and the physics of art conservation. Becoming an Albright Fellow helped me do just this. It helped me find harmony between fields that are often thought of as being in discord. It also taught me something important about interdisciplinary learning. Interdisciplinary learning is fun and interesting in its own way, but it can also be a powerful problem-solving tool, and it may help us tackle some of the most challenging issues that we face today. If we skim today's headlines, what do we see? Climate change, regional conflicts, global inequity and poverty, these are all large, complex issues that demand our swift and responsible action. How can we leverage our problem-solving skills to fix these issues? We need to begin by bringing a diverse group of voices to the table, and I've experienced this in two very powerful ways. When I worked at CERN, the large laboratory that discovered the Higgs boson, I worked on a team that combined diplomacy, physics, and communication skills. The primary members of my office were physicists who had taken on international relations as a second career and whose roles required continually synthesizing information from multiple fields to make informed decisions. Our office did everything from running a summer student program to hosting foreign diplomats and scientific delegations. By working across borders and disciplines, my mentors were role models for interdisciplinary leadership. My office mate that summer is another great example of this. She was born in Poland, educated in Ireland and France, and was studying to be a lawyer. She was fluent in 5 different languages, and this, combined with her communication skills, gave her the power to tackle almost anything that our office could throw at her. One morning, we had a student call from the airport where his visa had been denied, and he was not allowed to enter the country for his summer student program. She quickly got on the phone, and using her excellent communications and diplomatic skills, was able to resolve the issue quickly. Throughout the course of the summer, she helped me brush up on my rusty French language skills, and I helped her learn the data and analysis commands in Microsoft Excel that I learned right here as a physics major at Wellesley. By learning from each other and sharing our different skill sets, we were much more effective at our own tasks than we would otherwise have been. The wonderful thing about CERN was that this attitude didn't just exist in my office, it was throughout the laboratory. One of my duties was to analyze the summer student program by contacting former students about their experiences. When I went back into the records, I saw just how international and far-reaching the program really was. I contacted over 650 students from dozens of countries. There were indeed a lot of physicists, but there were also mathematicians, engineers, computer scientists, and other specialists who all contributed to the lab's important achievements. So my summer at CERN taught me 2 important things about interdisciplinary work. We need to bring together people from diverse fields and create roles that honor these different specialties. I worked at the White House this past fall, where I again saw the value of interdisciplinary learning. Like at CERN, my colleagues at the White House worked with a broad spectrum of internal and external partners to help advance the administration's agenda. I was lucky enough to work on the Police Data Initiative project, which helps connect interested police departments with data scientists and technologists to create more transparent solutions for policing data. My colleagues were data scientists, lawyers, and other subject matter experts from multiple White House offices. Team members were encouraged to invite other interested participants to join our discussion, which fostered an open and evolving dialogue. By doing so, we were able to look at ideas holistically and were better informed and created better solutions as a result. So my experiences at CERN and the White House taught me that interdisciplinary learning can help solve global problems. How can we apply this in our own lives? We need to create a culture that brings together experts from across fields to solve challenging problems. And we can all do this, regardless of where we are in life and no matter our area of expertise. Let's stop and think about it for a minute. What is the most unexpected place that you think your skills might be valuable? You might be surprised. It's not enough to tell ourselves to think outside of the box. We need to realize that there shouldn't be a box in the first place. By breaking down barriers and thinking across disciplines, we can liberate ourselves to think in more inspired and informed ways. Becoming an Albright Fellow was the first time I felt like I had been understood as someone who had interests in multiple fields. It meant a lot to me, and still does. And I think that what we need to do is encourage collaboration between experts in lots of different fields. And by doing so, we can take a step closer towards solving the greatest global challenges of our century. So, can we do it? I think that we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandra. Our next speaker, Mayrah, is concerned with trying to understand the human experience in the nexus between the natural and built environments. Mayrah studied architecture and environmental studies at Wellesley and has since gone on to do a Watson Fellowship and work for Urban Think Tank. She has researched indigenous housing insecurity, and she likens this research to a silent meditation retreat, because she was so often in contexts where she could not speak the local language. She's looking forward to breaking her silence today in a talk entitled, Draw Before You Think Before You Ask Before You Do. Mayrah.
I love this photo. I had just been explaining to the photographer why I had come to this village without a camera, when suddenly this woman appeared in front of us, snapping away on her iPhone. This type of photographic objectification has become a ritual for the Kara people of southern Ethiopia, who now ready themselves every morning at 9 a.m. for the influx of tourists. When the sound of a 4x4 can be heard, they rush to position themselves, adorned with headdresses, leather skirts, and their infamous white face paint. Exchanges with tourists are curt. 1 photo, 10 bur, snap. After 20 minutes, the tourists are back in their cars, ready to leave the valley's heat and litany of awkward interactions. I wanted to start here because I think it articulates a phenomenon happening outside the field of tourism as well. Too often we, the researchers, lawmakers, aid workers, designers, educators, with a social agenda, try to understand the context we're operating in much too quickly. In attempting to wrap our minds around something or someone unfamiliar, we project and oversimplify. This can leave the photographer feeling incomplete and the photographed feeling entirely misunderstood. Many of you have probably witnessed or experienced the inevitable outcomes of this strategy: lack of trust, patterns of dependency on foreign actors, corruption, the inability to maintain programs, and ultimately actions that reinforce unproductive neo-imperialist agendas. I left Wellesley in 2014 knowing that before I launched into a career in social impact architecture, I needed to clarify for myself how the role of the architect can transform from one that has historically been linked to political, social, and economic power to one that serves the public interest. Over the past 18 months, I have traveled to 18 different rural and indigenous communities in Borneo, Peru, Bolivia, Ethiopia, Siberia, and South Africa. I've developed a toolkit for myself along the way called visual journaling, which has allowed me to engage respectfully, articulate these communities' struggles to sustain their homes, and recommend solutions. This is a powerful toolkit that I think can be of use to you no matter what field you are a part of. I truly think it has the power to help us both be and inspire the change we wish to see in the world. In this talk, I'll explain why. The lingual, racial, and cultural differences between me and the communities I stayed with would have been real barriers to full engagement without my visual journals. Most of the time, I had no way of verbally articulating why I had trekked 8 hours into the bush and why I wanted to stay in their village. Having my journals allowed me to show what I'd been doing in other parts of the world. I purposefully traveled without a camera. Drawing was a process, one that people found interesting. A woman who had gotten so tired of being photographed by tourists that she no longer allowed them near her actually asked me to draw her cooking. It became a way of sharing and generating nonverbal conversation, and it was also fully transparent. At the end of my visits, people would know exactly what I was taking away with me. This is a drawing I did of a Hamar woman named Barinka in her home in the southern Omo Valley, Ethiopia. It was early morning, and she was making coffee out of the shells of local beans and pouring it into various gourd bowls for her family. I tried to stay as far away from scholastic texts as possible over my travels, not because I think they're valueless, but because doing so would have framed my knowledge of the communities I was trying to learn from. Relying on writing and interviews when doing field research can similarly force you to adhere to a hierarchy of knowledge wherein you, the foreign researcher, extract information from the subject and interpret that information through a prescribed scholarly framework. Why is this dangerous? It trivializes and manipulates local knowledge and narrows your lens of discovery. Drawing uses an entirely different part of the brain and allowed me to be more perceptive rather than judgmental. It enabled the people I stayed with to share with me their knowledge of their homes and histories non-verbally, and it also allowed me to understand the spatial ramifications of problems. They pillaged our village and cut us off from our forest resources becomes a much more powerful message when you can show a map or a diagram of how they had been cut off spatially. This is a drawing of Umanyaving by a Kayan man named Alex, whose community was forcefully resettled. The Kayan are one of several tribes in the mountains of Malaysian Borneo. In the 1980s, their land began to be stolen and ravished, first by logging companies, then palm oil plantations, and most recently through a series of hydroelectric megadams. Through this drawing, Alex shows how the Bakun Dam impacted his life. In 2011, the dam was impounded, flooding an area the size of Singapore and displacing over 11,000 indigenous people. His home now lies 200 meters below the lake's surface. Photography and writing, the most common methods journalists and scholars use, easily narrow and flatten very complex ideas. People often want to remove complexity from their message, as it gives their audience an easy choice. Do I side with the good guys or the bad guys? Using concept diagrams like the ones here, however, still preserve complexity in a way that's organized and follows a storyline. This can make the subject's life more comprehensible, help you relate on a human level, and help you understand the ultimate causes of challenges we're seeking to address. Here are two diagrams of different activities that happened in a shack I was staying in Kailicha Township, South Africa. By explaining these processes spatially, I'm also able to preserve more of their complexity. It's often difficult to quantify poverty, let alone know how to start to address it. Statistics are important, but it's difficult to paint the full picture with numbers alone. When we start to use drawings to analyze people's lives, we can better understand how poverty impacts their physical environments. Through this, we can also start to develop more nuanced solutions, whether those solutions relate to redesigning a space for better ventilation or to providing people with the training and microloans they need to grow and sell their own vegetables. Solutions we help implement should be based on local knowledge rather than preconceived ideas of what is and isn't important. Here's a diagram showing the ways in which a government resettlement house in Sungai Sap, Borneo, failed to create livable and empowering spaces. By showing these design flaws and how they fit together on a single page, we can start to understand possible solutions. One of the biggest ethical debates in the fields of activism, aid, and development is who should implement the change. Many will argue that those privileged with good education, skills, and resources have a moral obligation to help those who do not. Others argue fervently that aid and development are masked forms of neo-imperialism and that rich nations should just stay out of developing nations. I have to believe that I have a place in the international sphere, even if it is only as a cross-pollinator, resource sharer, or architectural assistant. But I ultimately believe that development, however we choose to define it, will be most successful if it is bred and maintained by people with stake in their communities. One of the most powerful things I saw during my travels was how quickly young people picked up my pencils and began to draw with me. It became a teaching tool on both ends. They would draw for me their interpretations of their homes, and I would draw aspects of their spaces that they had never thought noteworthy. Drawing and field analysis are powerful tools to share with young people all over the world, as it can help them articulate both the beauty and the problems of their physical environments. Many of you are probably thinking, but I can't draw. How is this toolkit useful for me? Visual journaling, more than anything, is about process and consciousness. I want you to imagine a scenario, past, present, or future, in which you set out to have a social impact, but found yourself struggling. Now overlay this mantra onto that scenario. Draw before you think before you ask before you do. Draw before you think. We don't have to be assertive every second of the day. Sometimes activism must first take the form of quiet introspection, whether you use drawing, reflexive writing, creative movement, or simply meditation to achieve this is up to you. Show respect, show interest, and show openness before making judgments or trying to analyze a situation. Think before you ask. Sometimes the questions we ask don't even need to be vocalized if we just open our eyes. What are you most afraid of at night? Or how do your children get to school? Are questions so easily answered if we just allow ourselves to spend time with the people we're trying to learn from. It's also so easy to imply judgments in the types of questions we ask and of whom we ask. Ask before you do. Rather than setting our own agendas, we should offer ourselves as facilitators with technical knowledge who can advance the agendas of the communities we hope to work with. Ask first, and in doing so, you will empower them to be the masters of their own fate. Thank you.
Our next speaker, Christine's story is inspired by her father's immigration from China to her Wellesley education, the Albright Institute, and ultimately a Fulbright Fellowship. Christine has had the opportunity to study and explore China on both a professional and personal level. During her time researching waste disposal in Xi'an, she was exposed to the many ways that women in particular are involved in solving the challenges of the region. And she invites us to think about how women, we play a critical role in addressing important global issues. As a result of her experiences, Christine has realized that the best way to learn foreign diplomacy is over the dinner table rather than in the classroom. Christine.
On our first day as Albright Fellows, Joanne Murray asked us, what do you care enough about that you will dedicate your knowledge, your resources, your network, and your motivation to focus on? Growing up, working at my family's small Chinese restaurant, what mattered the most to me was honoring the sacrifices that my parents made so I can have opportunities like this. I am so grateful to be amongst peers who inspire me every day at Wellesley, and I'm very grateful and humbled to have an opportunity to share my story with you today. When I graduated from Wellesley, I knew I made my parents proud by being the first in my family to obtain a college degree. But it didn't end there. Beyond just obtaining the degree, I wanted a chance to use it in a way that was meaningful to me. I knew that a Wellesley education could be used to insulate and distance myself from the problems of the world, or become a force to address them. I left Wellesley with a charge to educate, advocate, and organize for the greater good, and a deeper desire to connect with my past. This is my dad standing in front of his childhood home in Ili, Xinjiang. This is a region that's dominated by Uyghur and Kazakh ethnic minorities. It's located on the border of China, Russia, Mongolia, and Kazakhstan. My dad is a Chinese farmer who believed in the American dream of equal opportunity for his daughter. And his trials as a sent-down youth during the Cultural Revolution took him from the cave dwellings in northern Shanxi to the oil fields of Karamai, and finally to the kitchens of Los Angeles. My parents' journey to give me a better life provided me with a more nuanced view of China, one that is laced with the bittersweet knowledge of the sacrifices that paved the country's progress. More poignantly, it gave me a deeper appreciation of what it meant for me to be American. As a State Department Fulbright Fellow, I spent the past year living in rural Shanxi, researching ways to address the severe water shortages caused by water contamination and overuse. I traveled to over 60 villages and saw firsthand the haphazard dumping of used medical supplies and agricultural chemical wastes. 2/3 of China's young people still live in these regions, exposed to these poisonous watersheds. As they grow up and move into the cities, they have the potential to propel the country's growth or dampen its dynamism. When I first started interviewing the farmers, I made the mistake of bringing my own preconceived notions of waste into my line of questioning. I approached it as an academic. I was trying to measure the aesthetic parameters of the Chinese watershed. I asked them questions like where they were getting their drinking water. I was asking them questions on how they treated waste. And their response was just laughter, probably because these were the wrong questions to ask. I made the mistake of engaging with these farmers with a lot of knowledge on the economic and scientific factors of waste, but failed to consider the historical, cultural, and political underpinnings behind it. For example, these villages, they historically relied on subsistence farming. And so with the introduction of a capitalistic economy, the trash that you found in the rural countryside transformed from biodegradable food waste to plastics and synthetic materials. But it did very little to transform farmers' behaviors and attitudes. A key lesson I learned from the Albright Institute was to take an open-minded and multidisciplinary approach to learning. And only when I stopped talking and started listening did I hear the right questions to ask. All of these farmers want is a basic version of the things that our parents want for us, and what we in turn would want for our children. Quality education, even if the nearest high school is hundreds of miles away. Safe, nutritious food to support their development. And a chance to lead lives that are easier and more comfortable than the ones they had. And yet rural farmers cannot take the steps to address these basic needs. In rural China, lack of ownership is not just development jargon. It represents the physical reality that farmers cannot buy or sell the land that they work on. The government's failure to protect property rights hobbles any system of accountability when it comes towards waste. These insights reinforced my belief that waste issues in rural Shanxi cannot be addressed through top-down mobilization. Instead, any sustainable solution must reformulate rural residents' concept of community. It must give them the knowledge, the agency, and the motivation to preserve, protect, and invest in the land they live in. This is where women come in. The exodus of farmers to move into cities and become migrant laborers have feminized agriculture. So while women are gaining more autonomy, becoming the heads of households and the primary caregivers, they and their children also bear the disproportionate cost of environmental degradation and water pollution. Working with my research partners in Xi'an, I designed a women-led community program that aims to reduce the amount of hazardous waste along the Wei watershed, the largest tributary of the Yellow River. Once the cradle of Chinese civilization, this region is now amongst China's poorest. Women are trained on safe methods of recycling hazardous waste, and they partner with village doctors and distributors of agricultural goods to implement a tracking system that captures hazardous waste from point of purchase to local usage, storage, and disposal. This is also an opportunity to show that when you empower women to become environmental stakeholders, it enhances the community's resilience in a resource-limited context. Access to drinking water, sick kids, and a stonewalling government isn't just something that happens in rural China. It happens all around the world, and it happens in the United States. In Flint, Michigan, it was the women who spoke up and bridged the disconnect between available information, knowledge, and empowerment. It was Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha who blew the whistle after treating toddlers with doubled blood lead levels. And it was newly elected mayor, Karen Weaver, who called for a federal investigation on the Flint water crisis. These narratives all reinforce a common theme. That is women's roles in developing, driving, and becoming the solution. It was there in Flint, it was there in rural China, it is here in me, and it is here at Wellesley. Our alums are a testament that when you empower women, she becomes a catalyst for positive change whose success benefits everyone around her. These women, they're not the faces of poverty. They're the key to overcoming it. And my narrative is now interwoven with the lives of rural women. And in sharing my own story, I aim to create opportunities to share theirs. Thank you.
It is with particular pleasure that I get to introduce our next speaker, our final speaker, Zara. Zara and I traveled together to Nepal in the summer of 2009 after our first year at Wellesley, where we interned at a hospital together and explored a new country and a new city with a lot of laughter and a lot of learning. Zara has since gone on to explore the business side of healthcare at a consulting firm and now conducts research and writes case studies on best practices at Harvard Medical Center for Primary Care. Zara's talk will look at the current gaps in our healthcare system and reveal why human relationships will be a fundamental piece of healing for us all. Zara.
Healthcare is a fundamental right, not a privilege. But that right costs the US almost 1/5 of its GDP. And we don't even have better results than the developed countries that spend less. Are we missing something? We might be. In my personal experience, healthcare is more than just charts, treatments, medicine. It's also about relationships. About a year ago, my grandmother started to say, "I love you," just a bit more. It was a signal. Every call with her ended with this, "I love you." It was also around the same time that I found out her anemic state was actually a pre-cancer state. And I couldn't help but feel like this, "I love you," was actually a warning. Those words were like red hot wax stamping and sealing the fate of a message. Acute myeloid leukemia. About a month ago, my mom and I accompanied my grandmother to one of her appointments with an oncologist. Oncologist knocked on the door, sat down next to her with nothing in his hands, and faced her, not the computer. He began the conversation. "How are you?" And she responded with a smile that reached her eyes and told him about our recent family trip to Disney World and Universal. She loved the Spider-Man simulator and got drenched on the Popeye ride. She just turned 80 years old, yet she said she felt like a kid again, and that having her children and their families there with her made her so happy. He listened for a while longer, and then moved on to the traditional aspects of an office visit, discussing lab results, blood work, the week's chemo schedule, but by using phrases like, "I'll be here with you throughout," or "We will figure out the next steps together." And through this process of shared decision-making, she was engaged in her care. She felt a bit less stressed and felt supported. And he understood what her priorities were: quality of life, family, and what kind of lifestyle she wanted: active. And so he recommended an appropriate low-dose treatment. And so I was thinking about these two types of relationships in healthcare that I had just seen. One, the relationship between the provider and patient. And two, the social support a patient receives through family, friends, community, etc. So was it more powerful to provide social support to a patient, or was there a greater healing power in the patient-provider relationship? I realized this was the wrong question because both are important. Both of these relationships have the power to change us, our decisions, our lifestyles, our habits. And turns out there's evidence behind this. As a researcher at Harvard Medical School, I get to study high-functioning health systems, both in the US and abroad. And there's been a very surprising but consistent theme in our research, that if you build relationships at an individual patient level, you get lower costs and better health outcomes. Let me tell you about one example here in the US. The South Central Foundation in Alaska. They call the American Indian and Alaska Native people they serve customer owners. They also believe the relationship between the primary care team and the customer owner is the most important way to influence their lifestyle choices and healthcare decisions. They also fully realize that their 65,000 customer owners are ultimately in control, and that it's important to understand their unique stories, values, and influencers. And their 1,700 employees are trained continuously in relationship building skills. Among many successes, they've reduced ER visits by over 63% in the last 10 years. And satisfaction rates of customer owners and employees consistently at or above 93%. Employees even say how they use these relationship building skills back at home with their own families. And so here we see both the medical and social relationships. Our findings were not only within our own borders. When traveling to the Netherlands, we came across the social prescription. Literally, a prescription for the social aspect of health. A provider would use it for, say, a patient battling depression. During an office visit, the provider would pull out a prescription pad and write a prescription for a social worker. The social worker would then connect the patient to various opportunities, things like volunteering in a kitchen, taking a knitting class, or joining a sports team. And patients said that they felt healthier, they felt needed again, and had a more positive outlook on life. But in order to get to that point, both the medical and social relationships were necessary for the patient. And so I was thinking about my grandmother and the parallels with our research. It was clear the oncologist understood the importance of both medical and social relationships. And so I leave you all with one last thought. Everybody has a right to healthcare, but everyone must also be involved in healthcare. It may not be as obvious as being the patient or provider. It may be by extension, through a friend in class, your neighbor, or your grandma. Thank you.
The Albright Institute is a call to action, to shape a world that is better for everyone. The mission of the Institute is not just to increase our students' understanding of the world, but to prepare fellows for leadership in that world. Whether as a news anchor, a businesswoman, a scientist, or as a caretaker, each fellow is called to advance her work to address the most daunting issues of our time. In whatever field a fellow is called to lead, she advances the legacy of Wellesley's mission of service for the greater good. We were fortunate enough today to hear 7 enlightening, breathtaking stories from 7 of our Albright alumni in very, very unique and very diverse areas of study, experience, and geography. There are 270 more Albright alumni stories out there, and tens of thousands more Wellesley alumni stories. I hope today's MaddyTalks inspire you all to think about how you would tell your own stories. And I encourage you, each one of you, to think, will we get to see you up on this stage next year? In just a few minutes, we will invite Secretary Albright and President Emerita Chapman Walsh to join our fellows on stage for a conversation about the impact of their experiences on their chosen paths. We invite you to remain in the auditorium and please remain seated as we do a very brief stage reset. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. That was truly fantastic. And I don't know who this Madeleine Albright is, but she could not have done what you guys did. Really fantastic. And so many aspects of the Institute that you have brought forward and made real in a way that I don't think either of us thought was possible. So again, I want to thank Joe and Joanna for bringing it all to life and all of you that have worked on it. But this was truly remarkable. And I made lots of different notes in terms of what I thought were remarkable presentations with some common themes that I saw in them. And I kind of wondered whether there are ways that you can come up with what you saw as common themes. And frankly, since part of the Albright Institute has been about teams working together, do you think you all could come up with a project that you could all do together as a result of what you have been doing? So that would be what I'd be interested in whatever order you would like to speak, but you were fantastic, truly.
Right, just from the heart. So very moved, touched by you, so proud of you, so excited about seeing you all go into the world and bring your brilliance to it. Thank you so much. But yes, so themes you saw, and I love this question. Could you imagine a project that all of you?
A lot of us spoke out about giving people an opportunity to tell their own story,
Yes.
like Mayrah's presentation focused on, think before you draw.
Mm-hmm.
Don't just start inserting yourself into other people's narratives. Let them speak for themselves. So that was a broad theme that I saw across all of our presentations.
Interdependence.
Mm-hmm. Interdependence.
Definitely. Cross-pollination, I think, was a term you used, Mayrah. And because of this theme of interdependence, I'm tempted to say that there's not one project out there that is like the project for us to work on. I'm tempted to say anything, bring it, and then we'll do it.
How do you see the experience of telling a story really solidifying your concepts of of the themes? How important is the storytelling in all of this?
I think Zara spoke really well to that aspect about the importance of narrative. And I think also this opportunity for us all to speak is a really powerful way for us to start to develop our own personal narrative, which I think is a really, really important thing to be able to grasp. Because it brings other people to your call to action in a way that no other story really can. You can talk about someone else, and it can be a really emotional story, but when you're facing someone and really can shine light on what you've been through, I think that's really powerful.
I know working in the news, we struggle every day with what stories we should tell and how we should tell that story. Should we have a package? Should we have a little documentary, a panel discussion? And what's the most powerful way to tell that story? And I think oftentimes we realize, again, to go back to that theme, letting people tell it for themselves, having just a reporter report on it, we found is not the most moving or powerful way to connect with our audience. People want to hear from the people who are actually facing that situation.
I think there was also a cautionary theme of how your own biases can actually reframe or can actually prejudice the story you tell. I actually didn't see Mayrah's presentation until yesterday, and I thought it was so interesting that we were essentially juxtaposed. I wish I talked to you before before I started to roll Senshi, and I had many prejudices because the way I understood China was actually based on my family's experience, and it was interesting to see what you were able to do in terms of understanding those communities.
Christine, do you think you could have used the visual journaling technique?
I'm not much of an artist.
I know. Mayrah said that doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I would add to what Christine said. I thought your point about women being both victims but also the solution finders for poverty was very interesting. And I think when it comes to storytelling, so often the way women are understood in the global development framework is as victims, and that finding those stories and giving platform to those stories is what can make us reframe the way we understand women.
Yeah, and one other thing that I found really interesting is this whole morning we celebrated what the Albright Institute means for us and how it's about women's global leadership and interdisciplinary problem solving. And I think just these 7 stories in some ways captured a little bit of all that, from a scientist's story and journey to someone in healthcare, someone working in business. And I think that just the power of storytelling, I think, just came to life for me right now as I listened to each of you guys.
One of the themes that I saw in what you all were saying was respect for others. Whether it was respect when you go to a foreign country and take a picture. I'm never going to take another photograph. And then also respect for each other's disciplines. I think we have a tendency kind of to deprecate one or the other or be afraid of a physicist. But I do think that respect I see as a theme. And I think that I've seen that when I've attended the Albright Institute sessions in terms of people understanding how the various disciplines go together and having a respect. And then the other part that I saw was listening. That goes with respect. The question that I really have also, especially of those that have been abroad and done a lot of your work there, is how do you think one imparts knowledge and experience without being patronizing if we don't draw? I mean, I think one of the hard parts is how do you, in fact, relate to people that need something that you know, that you've studied very hard to acquire, and really present it, or even I can tell you myself at the moment, I have been desperately involved in trying to make public-private partnerships work. Talk about boxes and silos, and it doesn't matter. It's that question always of how do you present knowledge without being patronizing about it. Did you get any ideas about that when you were in the field doing what you were doing?
There was a recent panel I had been on, which was in Massachusetts, not abroad, but it was the commissioner of the Department of Public Health here, and she said that when she wants to know what's happening with a patient, it's not this paternalistic, coercive kind of relationship that happens. It's maybe a simple question of, what would you like? And then from there, the story just flows. And so these were conversations that were happening around, well, I want to be able to attend my daughter's wedding. Or where am I supposed to store my insulin when I'm homeless and living under a bridge? So there's, I think, a lot that we can learn from in terms of context, where a person is coming from. So that's where the listening comes in. And hopefully you can use their words and share that with the world.
That's a great point. One of the boards that I've been on, the president, it was a healthcare organization, said, instead of asking people, what's the matter with you, ask them what matters to you, and it changes everything. It's exactly what you're saying. So I think, Alan, you're right about this issue of respect and engaging deeply and patiently. There's something about patience. There's something about the power of the pause. And I think many of you sort of describe that. You know, we're just, our heads are filled with information, ideas, good intentions. We're charging in. And then either something stops you short in your tracks, or you develop the consciousness to pull yourself back and pause and think again. And that was very much your mantra at the end of your beautiful talk. But for everybody, I think maybe that's part of it. And just to hold that in your mind, that I'm coming thundering in here.
Yeah.
Pause.
Yeah, and I actually would love to comment on just that, the tension that we heard throughout the talks in terms of even when you're thinking about development, who who should be playing the role of fixing other people's problems, and who am I to go do that? And I hear you on that challenge when you're, especially because I'm doing public policy and business right now, and it's just day and night what you hear at the Kennedy School versus the business school. Yeah, but in some ways, I think, like even the examples that I gave about Nestle and like what they're doing with the products, I think one of the things that I guess I would just love to share in addition to that is that this is an approach that I think the fact that business models can bring scalable and sustainable solutions is one approach, and I guess it doesn't have to be a large multinational company coming into other countries to impose these kinds of ways of doing, of creating solutions, but it could be the local entrepreneurs adopting this approach and creating solutions for their own communities. So I guess there's an element in my mind where if I find something that I think could work, having the courage to speak up and share that, but having the humility to know that I'm not going to have all the answers, and the best solutions will come from the people who know their own problems and can really be creative and innovative in how they go about that. So I think it's sort of a lesson that I'm starting to just take away from all of the talks and after sharing what I shared as well.
And I think one thing we're all in a position to do is to connect people with each other. So we might not have the solution, and we might not have an answer that works for everybody, but having traveled to 4 countries to learn about how women engage in peace processes, their stories are remarkably similar. And actually one thing that the UN's Special Envoy for Syria is doing now is bringing women from Syria to Belfast to talk to women who created the Women's Coalition, who were part of that negotiation, and talk about how their lessons can be learned back in Syria. And I think that's something we're in a position to really move forward.
Can I ask you, one of the hard parts generally in getting anything done is the differences as to when do you stick to what you believe in, when do you listen and compromise? Is compromise a bad word or is it a good word? And think about the various issues that you've all been involved in. And this comes up about women negotiating. And so I think it's very important to know what you believe in, but you also have talked about listening and respecting others. So how do you feel about the word compromise?
You know, it's interesting because I feel like this topic comes up a lot when you're discussing politics and the current election, and people will describe...
I wasn't doing that.
Let's not.
Go ahead.
Without naming any names, people will criticize certain candidates for being flip-floppers or changing their position on something. And I often think to myself, why is that a bad thing? Why is it a bad thing to, learn new information, change your mind on something, or realize if you can't get A done, instead of completely giving up on the project, moving on to B, which could be the next big thing. So it's really interesting because I feel like we have this notion of standing by your principles, but I feel like sometimes that's just stubbornness that's getting in the way of productivity.
Right, and we're running towards our time boundary. There was certainly a theme about community. I heard that a lot. And women as community builders, and the importance, even the necessity of community, and at a time when our communities are coming unraveled dramatically. Robert Putnam wrote about it in Bowling Alone. He's just written a new book called Our Kids that documents powerfully how much in the US our communities are unraveling. So you've learned something clearly about what are the ingredients of communities that can be resilient, powerful, and part of sustainable solutions. And I think many of you know things about that. We probably don't have time to go through it very much. And then another thing I heard that I loved everything you said, was this idea, and the question really Joanne had put to you, it was you, Christine, I think, at the beginning. So what do you care about enough to commit to it in a very deep way? That's a really great question for all of us to ask ourselves, what will sustain our commitment through thick and thin, through challenges and difficulties. And part of what you all did, I think everyone did, was you wove a bit of your personal narrative in with your professional narrative in a way that really made it integral to who you are. And I think that's one of the things that does sustain us through our lives, this sense that we have as many of you said in different ways, we have a personal stake. So in that sense, it was beautiful too. And then just this idea, so one last thing, and then let the secretary complete it. But we have a former dean named Lee Cuba, who's just written a new book. It's not out yet, but it's a large longitudinal study of the liberal arts experience, 7 colleges, 200 students. And he tracked a process of making decisions and learning from them, a process of self-creation and recreation. He calls it a messy, complicated, ambiguous process that is the whole point of a liberal education. And I think part of what this storytelling is the same thing. We have multiple stories. It's not that one is true and the other is false. It's that we have choices we can make about the stories that we tell. And each of you made choices in the evolution to today when you stood on the stage and told a story. And once you told it, you really owned it. There's a wonderful quotation from a woman named Florida Scott Maxwell. You need only claim the events of your life to make yourself yours. When you truly possess all you are and have been, you are fierce with reality. And I think you stood here today, every one of you, and you were fierce with reality.
I really did kind of think about whether there was some way to bring all of you together on a project. And I think in many ways there are. I think that all of you are problem solvers and trying to put yourself into other people's shoes to understand how they are dealing with an issue. That you do have this sense about respecting other people's views while at the same time knowing what you believe in yourselves. You listen, and I think that you have a way of not only telling the story, but I watch you also listening to the other stories. And I think that is a very important thing. I wasn't kidding at the beginning when I said I could never have done when I left here what you all are doing, because I do think that the liberal arts have enlarged in a way. I have to admit that when I was here, many of you have heard me say this, which is between the invention of the iPad and the discovery of fire. In fact, I was a poli-sci major. I took a lot of history, and econ was going out of my lane. So I think that you all have a much larger spectrum of what a liberal arts education really entails. And the stories go together, whether you are trying to develop shared value in different ways, whether you in fact are working on health issues or women and peace, or trying to really understand physics I can't go to, I'm sorry. But the combination of what you learn and the way you talk about it in the West Wing, good luck, and the importance of communication. Anyway, there are a lot of aspects that I think go together. In my post-life here, I try to connect the dots. And the thing that I think you all will do, just on the basis of what I've heard here, is to always be curious and learn from each other and connect the dots. And Diana, it goes back to what you were saying when you and I talked about when you were leaving. You have to continue to connect the dots. People that work with me think I've lost my mind, but in my own way, I connect the dots. I do, in fact, support women running for office in the United States and all over the world. I do have a firm in which I do public-private partnerships. I do think about health issues in a lot of different ways. I do travel an awful lot. And I like people who can tell the story in so many different ways. And I have to say, being interviewed by you in the most intelligent way, I think you are the answer, all of you, to what the issues are out there. And I'm so very, very proud to have been a part of any of this. Congratulations.